Yeah, I just started. Thank you. I got a sign on there now. I can't push the start button over there without lifting up a sign that says, please remind me. All right, we have to orient ourselves first. And this is our third session of looking at horoscope examples of mandalic aspects. Taking the mandala as the symbol of the universe as seen by humans. And in the mandala, Aries is rising. Aries the sign, Aries the constellation, and the first house. Evening, Bonnie. And this says that active change is the principle that is most descriptive of the outer nature of the cosmos. The creation and the evolutionary process in that creation is a doing. Now, if we take the first cusp, whether it's of the constellation or sign or house, that is the epitomal cusp. And that is the cusp of cusps. And to find the aspects are the geometric relations of each of the other cusps to the first cusp. Like the cusp of the second sign and house is semi-sextile to the first cusp, and so on down the line. So if we take the rulers and put them on their cusps, as we do in the mandala, we have a kind of an archetypal aspect. And doing that, we understand the planets, we understand the signs and houses, but most of all, we understand the nature of the aspects. So this is what we're trying to do. We're looking at the mandala as a classic. At the same time, we have taken a step forward from the sub-series that preceded this when we looked at aspects as parts of a cycle. That is, each aspect is a stage in a cycle when the activity between the two planets in a cycle reaches some kind of critical point. Either a point where there's a precipitation or a point where there's a perfection of one kind or another, and such like that. We talked about that when we talked about a cyclical approach to the aspects, and we looked at the lunation cycle. Examples from the sun and moon in the monthly cycle. We said that the first half of the cycle, which is from the conjunction forward to the opposition, produces one set of aspects, and the second half of the cycle from the opposition to the conjunction produces another kind of set of aspects. We call them first and second aspects, and we call them constructive or destructive, or we call them active and contemplative. Now, a first aspect occurs when the shortest distance from the slower moving planet to the faster moving planet is forward on the zodiac. That's what a first aspect or a constructive aspect is. If the shortest distance between the slower moving and the faster moving planet is backwards in the zodiac, then you have a second aspect. Now, in this, the slower moving planet gives to the faster moving planet, just like in the sun and the moon. The light of the sun builds up, and the moon gets bigger and bigger. After the full moon, the moon gives its light back to the sun, and it is then the giver. And the giver is the planet that is in control. Whoever gives is in control of whoever receives. So, you would think that the two cycles would be equally ruled by the two planets, but it's kind of hard to talk about the influence of a planet ruling the half of the cycle that is going into destruction or breakdown. So usually we name the planet after the cycle after the slower moving planet. Now, this is a review, and it's a review that's necessary because when we come to the first aspect that we're going to study tonight, which is Mars in Aries trine to the Sun in Leo in the mandala, we run into something that is anomalous. The Sun moves about half the speed of Mars. It takes Mars 2 years to complete a cycle, and we know that the Sun completes a cycle every year. And we know that on the mandala, the shortest distance from the slower planet Mars to the faster planet the Sun is forward in the zodiac. This says that in this aspect, Mars rules. Now, it's difficult because for Mars, or for any other planet for that matter, to rule the Sun, because the Sun is a star, and it happens to be between the Sun and the Moon is merely a planetary satellite. So it doesn't detract from the dignity of the Sun to be ruled or in the cyclical aspect by Mars. It still is effective. Mars is still in control of the giving in between the two, but that doesn't mean that the Sun is no longer the Sun. We have things like this where there is a perfectly classical example that takes place that the Freemasons love to talk about a lot, and that is blacksmithing is ruled by Mars, and being a king is ruled by the Sun. And the King of England had to go to a blacksmith in order to be initiated into the Freemasons. And this is something that they point to with pride, saying that there is no real distinguishing thing, that everyone can be a worshipful master in the Freemasons, and there's a kind of fraternal equality there. I don't know which king it was, but you can ask the Masons and they'll be able to tell you. The king was still a king, but when it came to the Freemasonry, he was under the aegis of the worshipful master. Now, I hope this clarifies some things about the way dynamic aspects work and how not to be baffled by the luminous nature of the Sun. So we're ready to look at horoscopes now. Now, in mysticism, the triangle, which we're talking about with the trine, has always been the symbol of manifest spirit. Unmanifest or not completely manifest spirit has been indicated by the circle. In alchemy, the triangle was the representation of fire. And fire, in turn, is the element that is associated with spiritedness. So there's complete agreement between the alchemists and the astrologers and the spiritual philosophers about the nature of the trine. So we expect something like that from this mandalic archetype, something that is very, very spirited. The Sun and Mars are indeed the two most fiery planets in the whole gamut of planets. But the spiritedness does not have to be of the nature of a street fighter. It can be channeled into the kind of consciousness that is quite stately, something that is majestic in nature. And that is what we have with the first horoscope. First horoscope is J.S. Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach. It's a dirty data horoscope, but I'm willing to believe that it's true. His music, for the time, is exciting and it is inspiring, but it's very stately. It's very majestic. And that's the quality that we're trying to get at with this Mandalic trine. It is you might say that it is a fire of illumination that produces some kind of majesty about it. In this case, the Mars is in the 8th house. There's an awful lot of planets. 7 of the 10 planets are in mystery houses or houses of hidden things. And it's certain that his expressiveness does come from this aspect, which is the strongest aspect in this horoscope, that the drive and the energy that he is full of is to be expressed, because in the mandala, the Mars-Sun trine is between the 1st and the 5th houses, which are both houses of expression. It's almost like saying that he gets all of this inspired, enthusiastic energy, and it comes to the sun, and the sun is conjoined the ascendant from the 12th house, and it's like continuously bubbling over. You might say that if the sun were in the 1st house, he would just blow it all at one time, but this way it just keeps bubbling over again and again and again. It's inspirational, and it shows his expressivity. Now, Mercury and Venus in this horoscope are conjoined to each other, and they trine Pluto down in the 4th house. And the Piscean planets, Venus and Mercury, indicate a imagination. And the imagination is sustained by Pluto, like he can hold it long enough to express it and to get it out into the world. Let's see here. Now, there's an interesting thing here for spiritual students. The moon is void of course. It does not culminate in aspect until it enters the next sign. And what that means in normal horoscopes, it means somebody who does not have enough interest to accomplish things in life. The horoscope may be filled with all kinds of aspects that would indicate great talents, but the person just doesn't have the interest to push forward. But in spiritual charts, I have found this over the years, that if a person is highly spiritual, it means that the person is trying to do it on their own without being pushed by the stars. I have, in my own horoscope, I have a moon void of course. And I certainly couldn't have a whole lot more of interest and not die without being frustrated from being able to accomplish all the things I'm interested in doing. So it's different. You have to look at who you're looking for. The moon is pending a conjunction with Neptune. And Neptune is sextile to Uranus, and Uranus is in the 1st house, which shows that he is capable of spontaneous creation. When he gave the musical offering, he went and visited some noble somewhere, and he gave a musical offering that is famous, and in that he sat down at the organ and spontaneously improvised a perpetual fugue, which is an enormous accomplishment. The moon certainly is not barren. It rules the 5th house in this case, and Cancer in the 5th house is usually a sign of great fertility, and he had at least 20 children by 2 different wives. I think he had something like 13 with one wife or something like that. All right. Now, if we don't know about rebirth, some things have no satisfactory explanations. Why one person can be born brilliant and intelligent and multi-talented and be given a lot of money like John Kennedy, and why somebody else is born into poverty and is stupid and things like there's no answer for things like that unless you believe in rebirth. It seems awfully capricious of a divinity to make one way and one another way for no reason at all, when reason is one of the highest things that we have in our being. Now, the trine indicates perfection. Often people with trines attain things with very little effort. Now, without rebirth, there's an idea saying, well, that person is lucky, or that person is a natural. They were born that way. But with rebirth, we can see that most of the perfection has done in the past. Now, the next horoscope is the horoscope of somebody who is a self-made star, somebody who made his own destiny. He has the sun in the first house, and he has a natural enthusiasm. He's a singer that everybody thinks is an opera singer, but actually he's never been in an opera. He's a pop singer. He used to sing in cabarets more than anywhere else. It's Andrea Bocelli. I was going to put up examples for all of the musical. We have a whole bunch of musical people tonight, and I was going to put all of them up on YouTube and have them play, but I didn't get around to doing that. This is somebody that has a hereditary glaucoma, and it was discovered when he was an infant, and they had 27 operations on him to try to save his vision. And then after 27 operations, he was playing in the street with some other kids, and he took a soccer ball in the head, and he went blind. Mars rules surgery, and people who have Sun-Mars combinations often have a huge amount of surgeries. Now, the Sun is trine to Mars, and that would normally indicate success. But if you look at Mars is also square to Pluto, and the square of Mars to Pluto is stronger, and the energy is passing from the Sun to Pluto in what is called the translation of light, which I don't really care to go into at this point. So it's looking like that is the stronger aspect, is the square of Mars and Pluto. Now, Saturn is in the fourth house. And the fourth house usually indicates hereditary conditions. And Saturn squares Mercury, and Mercury is in the 12th house. And Mercury in the 12th house frequently means somebody that has problems with the senses. And being in a square to Saturn, it means that the senses are closed down. So by the way, this is a very highly accurate chart. So this makes a lot of sense. So this is the aspect that indicates what is behind the blindness, but it doesn't indicate the cause of the blindness. And the cause of the blindness is probably associated with the Mars square Pluto, because frequently, especially in cases of glaucoma, blindness is due to cruelty. Basically, glaucoma is an Aries condition in the first place. So there's possibly a history of cruelty that he's working out, only he's a living person, and we don't want to dwell on that too much because that goes to him, and it's not a pleasant thing to do with someone. And it's interesting that he's born with the sun in Virgo and Virgo rising, indicating that this life he has to become very gentle. He has a very gentle nature to override the nature that was probably a little bit too forceful in the past.
Richard?
Yes.
The fourth house indicates hereditary conditions.
Yes.
Saturn's in the fourth house.
Yeah.
Does that just mean there is?
That's a pretty strong statement of hereditary conditions. Yeah, and so there are different forms of glaucoma. Some of them you can develop, and some of them are hereditary, and he has the hereditary type.
Right. If there was a different planet in the fourth house, would it be?
Yeah. Other planets will do it also, but Saturn is the hardest one to get around. She's talking cabbie language to me. Now, Mars and the Sun aren't always majestic like Bach, and they aren't always gently masculine by Bocelli. Sometimes it is brash, and sometimes it is bawdy. And this is the horoscope of somebody brash and bawdy, the last of the red hot mamas, Sophie Tucker. In this case, the Mars, Sun trine Mars, first trine, is part of a grand trine. Neptune is in the grand trine, and it conjoins the ascendant. So this is somebody who's a martial person, and it sort of makes its way out into the world. It's an earth sign grand trine. So it isn't surprising that she would be defined by the world as an earthy type of person. The 10th house is the house, the way the world sees you. If you have fame or notoriety or something like that, that's what she was. This is somebody who is a tremendous influence. Almost all of the big-time comedians of our generation, everybody from Joan Rivers to Bette Midler, and all of those had as, even Roseanne, had as their ideal Sophie Tucker. Quite something. The Mars is trying the Sun, but the Moon is also trying to square the Sun. And the Moon is in Aries, which is a place where it is masculinized to the point that it loses some of its femininity. And so I think that there is something here of somebody who is not sure of her femininity and is trying to establish it and goes all out to establish it. The Venus is square to Pluto, and that may be somebody who's trying to prove herself or forcing or having forced on her emotional relations, and it's possible that it could just be a love obsessive. Neptune conjoined the ascendant shows that she's sensitive to hypersensitive, especially about her personality. She was a huge, huge woman. And she was sensitive about it, but she tried to laugh it off. In fact, one of her big songs that she played quite regularly was, "Nobody loves a fat girl, but oh, how a fat girl can love." That's the way she looked at it. The Mars square the Sun shows that she had the courage, and she could force herself through the sensitivity, and she could do it by entering into the sensitivity, because the Mars trine Sun is a classic for charisma, and so this is a highly charismatic person. I don't know how to say anything more. It takes courage to generate. Mars is in the sixth house. It takes courage to generate, and it rules the first house and Aries, and the sun rules Leo and the fifth house, which is expression. So this is a classic for having the courage to generate and express creatively. Now we run into a whole bunch of people that nobody knows. Sorry, I have to do that sometimes to we get the right people. Aries in the mandala is the beginning of things, and it is sort of like a big bang for the mandala. And usually, when things are fresh, there's more energy involved in them. Like you feel more energetic when you're doing something completely new. And the character of that early energy is, how do you say it, full-blooded. Mars in Aries in the mandala indicates somebody that does something all out. It may not last, but it's done all out. And so one of the keys of the Mars trine the Sun in the classic is sincerity, earnestness. Not the kind of sincerity that comes from Sun trine Saturn, which is a matter of conscience. It's a kind of sincerity that is the result of really caring about what you're doing and putting everything you've got into it. This is the horoscope of Kathy McWhorter, who is, she's a Hollywood screenwriter. And all of her reviewers, she writes novels also, all of her reviews of her movies are that she writes with great earnestness and sincerity. And it was the perfect example that I could find, but there's almost no biographical information. You start doing a Google search and then you start pruning down the Google search, and pretty hard to find a lot of data about her. What? The War. Perfect for Mars trine the Moon. It's a story about children and parents getting into a kind of war about things. She is one of the pupils of Steven Spielberg, and I'm pretty sure that the Sun in the 10th house in this case means that she is brought to prominence by that association with him, in that the 10th house is the house where people are raised up by other people, by their influence. All right. Now the next horoscope is somebody that is even more obscure. It brings out an important part of Mars trine the Sun, and that is the expression of energy being determined by the energy itself. That is to say, this is the example of Mars giving the energy to the Sun. And if, the athletes try to do this, they say just follow the energy. And if you flow with the energy, you're less likely to get hurt. You're more likely to make special plays. This is a horoscope in a life that is all about energy. This is a woman who is a very noted Reiki master. Reiki is one of those healing forms where a person learns to take in direct energy, and in doing that can heal other people. Most likely it is something like magnetic healing. The Mars in this horoscope is in the 6th house, and 3 other planets in the 6th house. This is somebody who's really sensitive to the illnesses and conditions of other people, and all of the planets that are there in the 6th house trine planets in the 10th house, meaning that this is somebody that is really going to be raised to a great note because of the things that she has developed. Not only the planets in the 6th house indicate sensitivity to illness, Neptune is on the ascendant, and that indicates a kind of compassion.
Jupiter's
Pisces. I said Neptune, but I meant Pisces. I'm sorry. So normally, with this many planets involved in healing, in common signs, you have the primary angles, Sagittarius and Pisces are common sign, and then you have the 3 Virgo planets and Jupiter and Pisces. That's usually not something that is sustaining enough. In order to do healing, you have to be able to not just feel for the other person, you have to be able to sustain. And she clearly, with the trine, by directing it and getting into the energy, is capable of sustaining long enough to be able to do healing.
Richard, you said the 10th house, people are raised up by others.
Yep.
Because of their own influence on others?
Usually because of the influence of the person above you. The 10th house is always people above you. They're like your boss or somebody like that. And if you rise to prominence because of somebody above you, that's almost always shown in the 10th house. All right. One last horoscope for the Sun trine Mars. And all of the ones that we've looked at so far have been about the perfection of the projection of energy in various personality traits and actually the physical projection of energy. In all these cases, it is cases of people who have developed it from within. And the aspect, Mars trine the Sun in a first trine, works equally well when you're working with perfecting the control of energy from without. But the only problem is that if it's working with energy from without, a person might be very famous for that, and you know nothing about them because their personal life is such that nobody knows anything about it. This is another a name that everybody knows, but nobody knows much about his life. It is Rudolf Diesel, the developer of the diesel engine. I used to think that there wasn't a man named Diesel. I was told that this engineer came to some, what do they call those investors that they'll put money into your project? And he said, yes, venture capitalists. And that he went to, that somebody invented the engine and went to the venture capitalists and said, Diesel will be the finest engines you'll ever see. And they flipped the coin and Diesel won. Humbug, humbug. So this is somebody, if we look at Mars is trine the Sun. But Mars is also opposite Uranus. And so that indicates something that is explosive. And the explosive condition in this case turns out to be something positive. The energy is applied and it heats up until it causes an explosion inside the engine, and it doesn't even require a spark plug. The heat of the compression is enough alone. And it's not surprising that the trine would be in watery signs. You're taking a liquid and you're compressing it to the point that it becomes vapor-like, and that gives you the extreme explosion. Now, did he have an explosive personality? I don't know. I couldn't find anything. It's a perfect example of how the trine works, but I don't know anything more beyond that. You might be involved in that sextile trine with the Sun, Mars, and Uranus. You might include Venus in there, and if you really wanted to stretch, you could say that Venus rules oil and petroleum products. But I think that's too much of a stretch, and you're just trying to make things too nice to go your way. So I Yes, but Immanuel Velikovsky thought it was because Venus was ripped out of the side of Jupiter, and we know that isn't possible because that red spot on Jupiter is not a hole where Venus was ripped out, it's a weather pattern. Immanuel Velikovsky had a lot of intuitions, but I don't think that he had a lot of knowledge. Some things the space age has proved him right, and in many cases the space age has proved him wrong. All right, now we're going to talk about the QuinnConks, the 150-degree aspect, and that brings up a whole another set of problems and controversy. And some of the controversy is thousands of years old. Claudius Ptolemy, in the Tetrabiblios, which means the 4 books, which is the basis of all Western astrology, he calls this 150-degree relationship an inconjunct. And literally, inconjunct means no aspect. Some other people, modern people, who think that it is not an aspect, but it's an implied aspect pattern. And it works like an aspect because it is an implied pattern. And they say, you know, like if 2 planets are 150 degrees apart, there are 2 points between them where you can produce a combination sextile and square. And that combination sextile and square is an aspect pattern. But since there is not a planet there, it's an implied pattern. And they use this as a backdoor means to describe the QuinnConks aspect. And that's a kind of thinking that is interesting, but it has a problem because there's no limit to it. Because if you then have a trine, you could call a trine is an implied aspect pattern that is made up of 2 potential sextiles. Or an opposition is an aspect pattern that is made up of 3 potential sextiles, or it's made up of 2 squares, or it's made up of a square and a sextile. You know, you can do that all the day long, and you don't know what is what. It's interesting to understand geometric relationships by doing that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the virtual points makes an aspect pattern out of it. We're going to do a lot of looking at aspect patterns later on in this course. I think it'll probably take us a year to get there, and we'll try to look at all kinds of juicy examples of that. All right. If the QuinnConks is indeed an aspect, it is certainly a minor aspect. And it should probably have an orb of no more than 2 degrees. And even then, it is usually, but not always, of minor influence. I use it when nothing else describes a condition in someone's consciousness, but the QuinnConks does. And there's such a case, I will use it. Or if I have a no-help situation and I need something to help a planet out that's in trouble, I will go to a QuinnConks as a faint way that a person can deal with a problem they have to work with. But it's like everything else in astrology. You go to it if your intuition tells you to. Now, whether it is an aspect or not, it is seen always as representing a complicated situation. On the mandala, the first QuinnConks, which is what we're looking at now, which is between Mars and the Sun, represents the stage after the perfection of building that the trine we just looked at is over. And that means that after perfection, things are starting to break down and deteriorate. The mandalic ascendant represents the physical body, and the physical body reaches its peak in your 20s. And after that, there's a breakdown. And the first things to go are nerve control coordination. And that is, again, a classic of Mars in conjunct with Mercury. So, the classic represents means to correct things that are breaking down, or means to heal or repair the body, or means to stave off deterioration that is starting to happen. And it indicates the kind of hygiene that we use to prevent things from going wrong. In the mandala, all of the aspects are Mars aspects, and that tells us then that exercise in changing our mental attitude, which is Mercury, is essential to health. It also tells us that being assertive and being positive is essential to health. So health on the cosmic mandala is very much a state of mind. Okay, we're going to have more to say about this aspect at other times, and so let's begin working towards some horoscope. Remember, we're working with a minor aspect, and we're trying to pick out many different sides of that minor aspect. So in many cases, we won't be able to pick up a lot at all, because it is a minor influence. I tried to pick out very obvious influences. This is the horoscope of Annie Bessant. She was a friend and associate of Madame Blavatsky, and for over 30 years she was president of the Theosophical Society. She was also a Fabian socialist, Uranus in the first house, and she was in that circle of great socialists that was Beatrice and Sidney Webb had that. Annie Bessant at one time was, how would you say it, the mistress of George Bernard Shaw, who was another one of the Fabian socialists, and she was in the coterie of women that were always around Mohan Gandhi. She was following that. We can see that with the Sun in Libra in the 7th house and Venus and Mercury there also, we can see that she really was a peacenik. Bertrand Russell was also part of the Fabians, and he was another one of the peaceniks. But the outer appearance that she gives, which is Aries rising with that Uranus in the first planet in the first house and Mars in the first house as well, is that she's fiery. And it's correct astrologically, her fieriness. Mars is in Taurus, but it's in the first house, and it forms an inconjunct with Mercury in the 7th house, and that's what we're trying to look at. And in her fieriness, for example, she was arrested for openly promoting birth control, which is considered a no-no. This is just barely a century ago. And she was so fiery that she thought in her previous life that she was Giordano Bruno, who was an Italian scientist who was burned at the stake by the Catholic Church. And for that reason, she wanted absolutely in this life nothing to do with Christianity. And Rudolf Steiner has an interesting thing to say, and he says that the teaching, the wisdom teaching from the mystery schools, when people are ready for that, but they are not ready for the Christ mystery, they usually end up going to theosophy. And that she's a perfect example of that. The Mars in conjunct Mercury indicates her technique at speaking. She was a very inspirational speaker. She couldn't always sustain it, but she knew how to arouse the public, and the general public is indicated by the 7th house. And she had a quick wit, and that she could promote good ends, but she fudged a little bit. and the things that she gave herself to weren't always ethical. But with so much Mars and Aries in her nature, there's such a thing where this is a chart that's excellent not only for the technique of using Mars Mercury as a stimulating thing, but it's an example of what happens if you do that too much. It causes faster. There was just a study published yesterday about doing too much thinking and brain loss, appreciable brain loss, and she became senile at a fairly early age, and was one of those people that recognized her closest friends in life by the end. Incidentally, there's another inconjunct in here that's even stronger, and that is the one between the Sun and Saturn, but that's of the other variety. It's a second inconjunct and not a first one. Now, sometimes I select horoscopes not necessarily on the basis of their astrological aptness for the example I'm trying to bring out, but sometimes it happens out that I take horoscopes because I like the people or I like what they do. And in this case, both are true. This is the horoscope of a very strong voice in early soul music and rock and roll music. Sam Cooke. Oh, I put an E in there. I put an extra E in there. Sam Cooke. Sorry about that. In this case, we're looking at the QuinnConks as an example of technique. Gemini is rising, and the technique is communication. And Mercury is the obvious ruler of the horoscope, and it's in a lovely trine with Neptune. Neptune being down in the 4th house, he can tune in. Neptune-Mercury things are the ability to tune in. So he can tune in to the delicate kinds of spiritual states in music, and they live in him. The 7th house, where Mercury is a house of shared communication. It's other-oriented. And if he does express something musically, it is for the sake of other people and not necessarily for himself. Now, these things would be sufficient for an artist, but to be great as an artist and to be accepted as an artist, you have to be able to be strong enough to get it across. And Gemini is not really a strong sign, nor is that Mercury trine Neptune really strong, so you have to have something, some way, some technique or ability to put verve, to put vitality, to put energy into the words, and that's what he did. Everybody's heard, "Darling, you send me." I'm sure you have in your life at some time. He was really quite, he really put himself into those words. Perfect example. The moon is in the 10th house, and it trines Jupiter and Pluto, showing the enormous wealth that he had from his fame. I think he had something, like 20 top 40 songs he had in a very short career. He died at 30-some years old. But he has a square between Venus and the moon in Jupiterian signs, and that's a kind of carelessness. And he had little regard for women, and it was careless, and it broke up his marriage, and you used forceful pushing words to get what he wanted, and he lost his child to drowning, and then he lost his marriage, and then he was murdered, or it was something that was self-defense when he was something like 30-some years old.
Where did you say he gets the verb? Because Gemini isn't a particularly...
From the inconjunct. We're saying that in this case, the inconjunct is the technique of being able to take energy and put it into the mind and into mental activities. All right. The next horoscope I'm almost in awe of. In fact, it's the best actor that I think I have seen in life. And it's one of those cases where a person can be so conventional that they're unconventional. This is a very complex horoscope. It has three QuinnConkses in it. Robert Duvall. I've never seen anybody act as well as he has. And when you have this many QuinnConkses, I get the impression, after looking through a bunch of them and doing the research for this class, I get the feeling that there is some kind of psychological principle that only a deep and strong concentration can maintain this kind of complexity. I find that in my own life, that I am able to do very complex things only to the degree that I can maintain concentration. And in this horoscope, there is plenty of concentration. The Sun and Saturn are partile in conjunction, meaning to say they are exactly conjoined to the degree and minute, and both of them conjoined to Mercury. If a person concentrates deeply enough, they make a breakthrough. And with that breakthrough, usually discoveries come. And in this case, the breakthroughs, discoveries come from the squares of those planets in the first house to Uranus in the fourth house. And Jupiter is opposite those planets. Pluto is also. So we have an enormous T-square here that is used quite effectively by him. He doesn't have a defect in his character at all. And on top of that, I believe he's the one that is infatuated with tango, isn't he? That I believe he goes down to Argentina, the Buenos Aires, and dances tango, and he married a tango dancer. So this is somebody that's really complicated. Beside this T-square, there is 30, 60, 90 triangle between Mars, Venus, and Saturn. And there are 4 sextiles beside in the horoscope. So this is a really complicated horoscope. And I don't know what to say more beyond that. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a wrong place in my notes here. Yes. So he has this spontaneous creativity. He does not rehearse. He learns the lines and he sits on them, so to speak, and he incubates in them, and then he's completely spontaneous when he acts them out. The Uranus trine Mars shows a spontaneous release of energy that comes as the result of the constriction. But just the release of energy is not enough alone. He has to have some way for his career to be able to bring that into manifestation. And that's what the QuinnConkses between Mars in the 8th house and all of the planets in the 1st house mean. It is drawing on a spontaneously generated energy in himself and being able to inject them into his personality and out into the world, since the 1st house is things outwardly in the world. Now the Sun Mars and the Saturn Mars indicate basically the mechanics of it. Saturn Mars is the mechanical aspect. Sun Mars, as we've just seen, is a raw expression of energy and drive carrying forward, but the technique Again, it is a verbal technique to be able to bring it out and have it make sense, to use the timing of the words and to be able to put himself into the words, and that is what is indicated by the QuinnConks of Mars to Mercury. I don't know what more to say beyond that. This is somebody that can verbalize, and because there's all that Saturn there, he doesn't overstate. He keeps it all under control. As we've been saying, when you work with the QuinnConks, you work with complication. And this is another person who has built a life that is very complicated. I'd like to do a mathematical analysis along with an astrological analysis to know what the odds are of something, someone having a very complicated character, and the QuinnConks to go with it. This is probably the most brilliant Supreme Court justice that we've ever had in the United States, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. There wasn't room to put it in the junior in. This is somebody who was called the Great Dissenter. This is a horoscope that has a T-square of Moon with Saturn and Mercury. Moon opposite Mercury, and both of them are square to Saturn. It's reasonably strong. This is the one that has Mars and Venus opposite each other, and they sextile and trine Saturn. So we have a lot of combinations. And this is the horoscope that has the 4 outside sextiles, like the Pluto. Where are they? There it is, the Neptune, Pluto, and there's another couple of Jupiter squares with Uranus and the Sun. But it is somebody that has a lot of interlocking aspects, a lot of complication. And, how to say it? The Sun is conjoined to Uranus, and that's somebody who has an independent, unique type of character. It's often freewheeling, and he is like that. In fact, sometimes he does it to excess, which is what the squares indicate. The many Saturn aspects show that he has not only excess, but he has frugalities. This is one of those horoscopes that makes you pull your hair out because the positives are very different than the negatives, and they both balance each other. The Jupiterian characteristics are balanced by the Saturn characteristics, and the opposition of the Moon and Mercury shows a lot of vacillation, so that he has a very hard time making up his mind. But as a justice, he used these things to his advantage. If you don't make up your mind, you deliberate longer. And this is what he did. He deliberated for a long time. Now we're interested in the Mars in QuinnConks with Mercury, which is reasonably strong. It's about a little over a degree, maybe a degree in 7 or 8 minutes or something like that. And his approach toward the law in the time that he lived in was considered radical because his approach was martial. He did things on the basis of process. When they talk about due process of law, he was very intent and made a lot of his decisions on the basis of whether there was the process of law was really carried out. And the people of his time, the justices, were formalists. They thought that you did everything on the basis of form, and it was almost like a theorem that this would be the natural conclusion of things from these, given these circumstances. But that's not the way he did everything. He did everything on the basis of experience. It is active experience that should determine the law, and not some formal process or something like that that determines what is just and what is unjust. And this is the way that he distinguished himself, and he changed the whole Supreme Court forever and ever. Beside all of that, he was a poet. And he was so brilliant that he wrote poetry while he was hearing cases in the Supreme Court, because he always knew where the attorneys were going with their arguments way before they ever got them out. And so he could sit there and write poetry. And one of his lines of poetry is something that is in my mind. I would say it comes up several times a month. And it's a really important line. It goes, "Weep not for those who bear the cross, but weep for those who bear the cross without the glory." Like the poor people who are suffering and are not going to learn for their suffering, or who take on burdens on themselves and are not going to be moved forward because of the burdens they've taken on themselves. One of my favorite people in history. Max Heindel liked them a lot too, but he liked a different part of the poetry. Now we run into a whole bunch of people that nobody knows again, but they're good examples. This is the horoscope, somebody that is probably unknown to every one of you. Jan Boone. Sagittarius is rising. Sun and moon are in Sagittarius right before a new moon in Sagittarius. And so this is an open person. The sun represents the inner person, the moon represents the middle person, and the ascendant represents the outer person. Having all three together in conjunction like that, this person is what they are. They're very open. What you see is what you get. And it is a matter of principle to her. It is a matter of conviction that she is open. Her whole life is based on that. This is somebody that has written over 400 articles for the National Enquirer, and has written hundreds of other articles for other periodicals. I have a friend who has a literature degree and is an excellent writer, and could not get a job with the National Enquirer because he could not write well enough. You have to use very spare words, and they have a formula. It keeps changing over the years. I've read the National Enquirer now for about 30 years, and it's really undergone quite an evolution. But you have to really be an excellent writer. This is, you have only so many words. It's one of those things that very rarely ever does an article that you have to turn the page to continue the article. It's all in one page, and this is Saturn conjoined Mercury is very terse in that way. But the thing as it works here is that it is getting things out into the open. Mars is in the 8th house, which is secrets. And the inconjunct, or the QuinnConks to Mercury in the 1st house, which lays it out right out there for the world to see it, is what her whole life is about. So the conviction is carried out by the technique of, like if you've been bad to your body, you're going to be ill. And that's the kind of thing that we see here, that what you are in your life, no matter how hard you try to keep it secret, it comes out. She's written 2 books. One book is about the understanding movies or understanding film, and the other one is called The Thompson Indictment, in which it is the same thing. It's a political expose. This is a person who is an expose writer. All right. Now, sometimes when I research for these classes, I turn up ideas about astrology that I don't know whether they're true or not. And this is one of those times, and I'm giving it for speculative reasons. This is the horoscope of an academic and scholar. Julie might be the only person who knows this person. In literary circles, she was quite famous. Jupiterian signs, again, are on the primary angles, and the sun is in Sagittarius. This is another believer in openness. And in this case, the openness is difficult. It comes begrudgingly because the sun is conjoined to Saturn, which tries to keep things secret or hold things in, and they're both opposite to Pluto, which is more of the same. But nonetheless, despite the tendencies to Jesuitism of being dark and secretive, she does manage to get things out. She was a chairman of the Department of Literature at Arizona State University at a time when very few women held such a position. She's an author, creative playwright, and she's quite a cultured individual. The scholarship is the 9th house, clearly, and the cultural qualities of that scholarship are indicated by the trines to Mars, all of that energy there. The thing that I chose this chart for is something very fascinating. Mercury, which is one of the planets we're looking at, is in Capricorn. And the condensing qualities of Capricorn are sometimes very strange. The great British astrologer Alan Leo has the horoscope of an individual who could say a whole sentence as a single word. He would say an entire sentence as a single word, that there would be no break in it. There would be that kind of condensation or concentration. And this woman was a polyglot. She was a famous Spanish translator, famous Italian translator. In World War II, she was a cryptographer, meaning to say she was capable of cracking any kind of code that was given to her. And she did it on the basis of understanding language, the technique of the way words are formed and ideas are formed, irrespective of what kind of garment they are given. She used that as a means to do cryptanalysis. I can see no other aspect for it. I'm not absolutely positive that that's the way the Mars QuinnConks Mercury works, but it certainly appears that way. This next horoscope probably should have preceded her horoscope. It's the horoscope of Margaret Wirkus. Everybody says he has such well-known people that everybody knows all about. I just threw it in for very quick because this is somebody that speaks many, many languages many languages, very much of a polyglot. Speaks quite a few languages. I don't know what more to say about it. The mutual reception is between the Mars and Mercury in the QuinnConks, and that means that the way the energy works with the mind becomes synergistic, so that the mind stimulates the energy and the energy stimulates the mind. And the way I understand that to work in this chart, and it doesn't disagree with the moon conjoined Uranus in the first house, or with Neptune conjoined to Venus in the sixth house. All of those things, and with the sun in Scorpio, indicate someone who has a feel for things. And this is somebody that can learn all of those many languages because she has a feel for the consciousness of other people. It's interesting in that she does most of her work supporting her husband, who is part of the bioenergetic movement and is a healer in alternative forms of healing. All right. And the last horoscope is one of those horoscopes of somebody that I really, really love a lot. It is a multi-talented individual, supremely multi-talented. Bobby McFerrin. Does everybody know who Bobby McFerrin is? He is trained in both classical music and jazz. In recent years, he works primarily as a classical conductor, and he goes around and doesn't do music appreciation, but he helps people to bring music out of him. The larynx is ruled by Venus, ruling Taurus, but the use of the larynx is ruled by Mercury. And this is somebody that really knows how to use the voice and how to use words. And this is the strongest example of ambidextrous technique, so to speak, or agile technique of putting together energy of Mars and the wits of Mercury. This is somebody, have you ever heard him sing? He sings several parts, usually two, but sometimes several parts of a piece of music, and you think they're all being overdubbed. But he's actually doing all the parts. And there are some wonderful YouTubes of him doing music. And that's, so of all of the examples of Mars in conjunct to Mercury, this is probably the clearest one, because he has this thing where he takes a whole audience of people that know nothing about music, and he does a pentatonic scale with his voice and with movements. And by the end, everybody completely understands the pentatonic scale, and that's a perfect example of that complicated dexterity of being able to bring something through. Next time we will look at the opposition, which is the one big anomaly, opposition of Mars and Venus, and we'll look at the inconjuncts of Pluto and Mars, which will be a little bit more heavy duty. Well, thank you very much. Yes.
Very basic kind of question. Sophie Tucker's horoscope, she has sun in 10th house and nothing in the 5th house, and you said that the sun rules expression or creativity, but she had no aspect there.
Well, she brings it out through the first house. It's a personal thing. Hers is a personal style rather than just pure expression.
Okay. Because everybody has sun and has a 5th house.
Yeah. I thought the question was going to be, where do you